Went 2 episodes talking about fairly positive people, so naturally the status quo must be restored. Let's talk about Oscar Derlevanger. He was possibly the worst human to ever exist, and made the rest of the SS look like fucking sugar plum fairies by comparison. If anyone deserved to be strung up, flayed alive, and covered in salt, it was this bastard. Oscar Paul Derlevanger, alternatively pronounced Derlewanger for my fellow Hicks in the audience, was born in Würzburg on September 26, 1895. Fuck all is really known about his early life, which happens to make mine difficult, so we're just gonna skip ahead to the part where shit gets a little more clear. In 1906, he moved to Esslingen am Neckar in Württemberg, going on to graduate high school in 1913, enlisting in the Württemberg army that same year. Naturally, his career progression brought him straight into the war to end all wars. Now, World War I had many effects on many people, but for Derlevanger, those effects were almost entirely mental. It's implied that the brutality drove him quite mad. He became a violent alcoholic and sadist, and only got worse as time marched on. He fought on both the Western and Eastern fronts, received an Iron Cross First Class, and would make lieutenant. He was also apparently wounded 6 separate times, which, knowing how medicine was in the early 1900s, probably made his problems several orders of magnitude worse. So the war ends, right? Now, the one thing keeping the man somewhat sane in any fucking way is gone. He joined the Freikorps while simultaneously actually getting an education. He attended the Goethe University in Frankfurt, studying political science, and graduating in 1922 with a fucking PhD. There's a timeline out there where this guy decided to be an influential political theorist rather than a nutcase. In 1923, he would join the Nazi Party and the SA, later also joining the SS. He jumped around jobs, probably helping fund the Nazis through embezzlement in the process. As you know, the Nazis came to power in 1933, and Derlevanger would get a low-level bureaucrat job before being almost immediately arrested for a not insignificant amount of tomfuckery. Firstly, him illegally owning firearms and all that embezzlement he did. Fine, whatever, people have done worse. But next it was for raping a 14-year-old girl from the Hitler Youth and stealing a government vehicle with a nice DUI charge strapped on top. Yeah, if this somehow isn't age-restricted, I'll be fucking stunned. He only served 2 years in prison, but was also stripped of his job, his degree, and his doctor title, his party membership, and his military rank. One of the police reports describes him rather aptly as a mentally unstable, violent fanatic and alcoholic who had the habit of erupting into violence under the influence of drugs. After his release, he was almost immediately arrested again for pretty much the exact same shit. This time, though, he was sent to a fucking concentration camp. Now, if there was any justice in this universe, he would have died in that camp. Fate had other plans, though. Derlevanger had some friends in high places, notably one Gottlob Berger, an SS guy who was not only an old army buddy of him, but also a friend of Heinrich motherfucking Himmler. Yeah, he was released, the charges were dropped and scrubbed, and he was let back into the SS. His time in the Lightning Lads is where things go from 10 to 100. He would fight with the Condor Legion in Spain, where he was wounded another 3 times, and with this service he successfully bargained for his party membership and degree back. So he's ready to once again hopefully put his past behind him and become a functioning member of society. Except no, fuck you. When World War II broke out, he joined the Waffen-SS. He was made lieutenant and put in charge of what would come to be known as the Derlevanger Brigade. It's about now where the man went batshit fucking insane. It was a penal legion, literally staffed by convicts expected to fucking die on the front lines. It was initially made of actual soldiers designed to fight partisans, but that would change pretty fucking quick. Suppose it's an easy way to unclog the justice system. By the end, it was more a war band than an actual military unit. Full of murderers, rapists, robbers, political prisoners, thieves, literal mental patients, the occasional disgraced soldier, and many, many more of society's undesirables. And Derlevanger commanded these guys exactly how you would expect. They were literal Germanic barbarians. Innumerable massacres, mass looting, mass rapes, including towards men and children, mass murders, quote, sadistic atrocities, burning civilians alive, erasing entire villages from the map, literally breaking the Nuremberg laws regarding sexual acts with non-Aryans, using terror tactics, extreme amounts of disturbingly creative torture, pillaging civilian populations, incidents of necrophilia, injecting pesticides into female Jewish prisoners to watch them convulse to death in front of them, using civilians as human shields, targeting and burning hospitals with patients inside, turning people into soap, sicking starving dogs on injured civilians, and even more mass killings. And these are just the ones that were written down. Derlevanger himself was a druggie and an alcoholic of mythical proportions, and personally partook in many of these crimes. The man easily has the blood of over 150,000 people on his hands, and many of these were done in truly horrific ways. They were so bad that the motherfucking SS refused to acknowledge them as an actual SS unit, instead referring to them as being under the control of the SS. They were still despised though, and were only kept around because again, Derlevanger had connections, and the unit itself was useful as cannon fodder and as a terrorist terrorist group. The unit's first station was occupied Poland in 1940, where Derlevanger served as commandant of a labor camp. He did bad things. So bad were these things that he was investigated for abuse by the SS. Yeah, Berger bailed him out again, though. His time in Poland also saw him participate in the erasure of several villages around Lublin to make way for future German settlement. In February of 42, he was moved to Belarus, officially to fight partisans. What he really did, though, was just run around aimlessly killing innocents. It's estimated that 30,000 Belarusians were killed over the course of a year, with another 14,000 estimated during Operation Cottbus in May of 43. The unit got fucked hard during Operation Bagration. Turns out literal criminals don't do well against actual army soldiers, who'd have fucking thought. The brigade was pretty much destroyed and then scraped back together just in time for the Warsaw Uprising. Derlevanger would take to suppressing the uprising the only way he knew how: overwhelming violence. In 2 days, he slaughtered an estimated 40,000 people in the Wola massacre and another 30,000 as he carved his way through the Old Town. Didn't matter who it was on the receiving end, he just killed, raped, looted, and burned indiscriminately. Hell, he killed German wounded that were in Polish hospitals as he destroyed them, and he would even hang some of his own men for shits and giggles. For his actions in crushing the uprising, he was promoted and received the Knight's Cross. He was then moved to break the Slovak national uprising using much the same tactics. Dozens of villages were burnt to the ground in reprisal, and over 5,000 Slovak civilians would be murdered in the process. Afterwards, he was sent to the front lines in eastern Germany out of sheer desperation, since the entire front was caving in by that point and they needed bodies to plug the shitload of holes that were beginning to form. Naturally, the Soviets kicked their asses repeatedly. The brigade started to disintegrate under heavy losses, with many men deserting or defecting, eventually with it essentially ceasing to exist, with Derlevanger himself being forced to flee in April of 1945, attempting to go into hiding. He brandished civilian clothing and likely tried to make a break for Switzerland. In the chaos of the German collapse, he actually made it quite far. He would end up in the town of Althausen, a veritable stone's throw from the border. The fucker was very, very close, but not quite close enough. Unlike some Axis generals, Derlevanger would get his comeuppance. In June, he was arrested, after likely being recognized by a former Jewish camp prisoner. After this, his real fate becomes somewhat convoluted. However, according to one of his cellmates, it's likely that he was tortured and beaten rather savagely while in captivity, apparently at the hands of some Polish guards. Of course, this meant that he died of natural causes around June 7th. He never married and was likely buried in an unmarked grave, although I personally like the idea of his body being burned and his ashes used to fertilize crops in Poland or Belarus. Giving at least something back to the lands he terrorized would certainly have been a fitting end for a bastard like him. And that was Derlevanger. In my opinion, there are very few people in history who I would consider to be truly despicable, but he is certainly one of them. His actions were sickening even for his comrades in the SS. Only saving grace is that he didn't walk when all was said and done. I hope there's a hell just for him, although I suppose hell wouldn't be too much different from what his brigade brought with them. In a way, he represents what humanity supposedly rose above, the human nature of violence and barbarism that we work so hard to suppress, unleashed without restraint, with the results that you would expect. Come to think of it, that gives me a